Welcome, everyone. My name is Hannah Beaton, so lovely to see you all, and I will be facilitating this webinar today. I'm the innovation broker at the TasFarm Innovation Hub, and this webinar will be discussing all things about solar on agricultural properties, or also known throughout this webinar as Agrisolar. And the hub is one of 8 hubs that's funded by the Australian government's Future Drought Fund. So the hub is located within the Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture at the University of Tasmania. So the hub brings stakeholders together to support drought preparedness and climate resilience of agricultural communities. I'm also dialing in from Hobart, which is Lutruwita traditional land, which I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the Palawa people, whom have cared for country for thousands of years and who continue to care for this beautiful land, sea and skies around which we all live and grow. I just want to set the scene a little bit as to why we're discussing Agrisolar. So in Tasmania, the government has set aims for annual agricultural production to be $10 billion by 2050. However, with climate and sustainability pressures, which are ever increasing, not just here in Tasmania, but around the world, the question is, can solar on farms be a part of the solution? So to explore more around the future potentials of Agrisolar, we have an awesome panel of speakers today who will share their expertise and knowledge around the Agrisolar industry. So we will dig into a little bit more chatting with each one of them. But for now, I'll just ask for each of the speakers just to pop off mute and just quickly introduce themselves and say hi. Veli, if you want to kick us off.
Hi, so Valley from Greenwood Solutions. We've been involved with the agrivoltaics project at Dookie Agricultural Campus. We're an EPC specialising in hard-to-do commercial solar projects, floating solar, solar farms, and anything that requires a bit of brain power, we love. So I'm personally very excited about agri, food, wine, energy. What's not to love?
Awesome. Thank you, Veli. Ganesh, if you'd like to say hi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ganesh. I am a PhD student at the University of Tasmania, and my PhD project involves modeling agrivoltaic system, Agrisolar. So in my PhD project, I am concentrating on livestock-based agrivoltaics system, but I'm also involved in modeling for agri-futures project, where we are looking at producing vine or grapes in agrivoltaics.
Awesome. Thank you, Ganesh. Alrighty, Roderick, if you'd like to say hi.
Hello, everybody. My name's Roderick O'Connor. I'm a farmer south of Cressy, engaged in a very large 300 megawatt solar farm in northern Tasmania, and I'm happy to talk to everybody about how it started and where we're going.
Awesome, thank you. And then Dr. Liz Smith.
Thanks, Hannah, and thank you for having me here today. So my name's Liz. I'm a Research Partnership Manager at Western Sydney University under the New South Wales Decarbonisation Innovation Hub. And together with the support of the Hub and my colleagues, I am directing a bid to the federal government for $40 million of investment into Agrisolar as a future industry for Australia. So I'll talk a little bit more about our bid and what we've submitted when my session starts.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So first up the rank, we have Veli from Greenwood Solutions. So I'll give just a bit of a background. So you guys might have heard a bit about agri-futures and research. So Veli is involved in the exciting cross-hub agrivoltaics research, which is funded by Agri-Futures. We at the TasFarm Innovation Hub are helping to support through sharing those research outcomes and extending them to the wider agricultural community here in Tasmania. So Veli, would you like to share a bit about your involvement in the Agri-Futures research and the solar installation that is happening at the University of Melbourne's Dookie campus?
Yeah, thanks very much. So effectively, the Dookie campus project is we're talking about grapes, and we're talking specifically wine grapes. This is a project that involved a pretty interesting solar panel structure that reaches for the sky. It's about 4 meters high off the ground, and the panels are arranged in such a way that there's a certain amount of light that actually gets through. So the main focus of the project was to create a system that still allowed enough light to get through to actually be able not hinder the biomass production of the vines, the viable biomass production, and at the same time provide a little bit of energy on site for the campus. Now, from a cost perspective, this is quite expensive compared to, say, traditional ground mount systems, which probably come out at around about $1.5 a watt. This is more along the lines of about 2.5 up to $3 a watt. In saying that, it was the first project that we did, and it's fairly small, and obviously you can scale up. So I'm coming from the perspective of the EPC, who actually we designed and helped design this system, and actually did the installation and the commissioning. The way I see it, the way I see agri, if you're talking about livestock, that's the most economically viable way to go. Sheep being the most obvious candidate. So, but the interesting thing is on these larger solar farms, you're moving away from static systems, and most of them have what they call an east-west tracking. So they start off in the morning facing east, and then they, over the course of the day, due to their smarts, they go to the west. So that in summertime, that really aids from a livestock perspective. They've got shelter, and contrary to popular belief, as we probably all know, sheep don't like hot sun. They like to be, they like a bit of cover like any animal. When it comes to the horticultural side of things or the agricultural side of things, I think the best sort of crops are those incredibly high value crops that are low to the ground. And we're talking about berries, we're talking strawberries, we're talking about whatever other kind of berries that have a very high value per square meter, because the big cost of the agri is once you start reaching for the stars. It's an engineering material cost scenario, and of course, what you're talking about in this situation is that cost benefit analysis between what are the panels actually doing to help aid the crop? Are they reducing, impacts of frost? Are they reducing impacts of hail, and all those considerations? But at the end of the day, if you're putting panels on top of a crop, you have to take into consideration how you're harvesting that crop.
Totally. Just as a quick last question, what would you say is a key consideration if there is a producer looking at installing solar on their farm? What's kind of one of the key practicalities that they may need to keep in mind?
I like everything, do your due diligence. Prudent approach is the best approach. Farmers are practical people. Take into consideration what your electrical infrastructure is, how far away is the switchboard, because remember, we have to connect to your switchboard. If you're kilometers away, there's all these trenching costs. So you have to look at the proximity. And I'm talking about the small scale. I'm not talking about the larger solar farms that are not necessarily looking at the consumption on the farm itself, but are looking at to actually send that energy elsewhere via various, financial arrangements, which may include PPAs. And I think I'm just about at the end, I'd say.
Awesome. No, thank you for those insights. That was really, really interesting. It was amazing. Thank you, Veli. So next, I'd like to pass things over to Ganesh. So Ganesh, would you like to introduce yourself and your background and what got you interested in this agri-solar research?
Right, so I'm a PhD student at the University of Tasmania. My project involves agrivoltaics. So I'm looking at modeling agrivoltaic system, especially trying to find how once the solar panels are installed in the field, what impact does it have on light distribution in the field, and how this light solar radiation that falls in the field would impact on biomass production. So one thing which we have found is that the light, depending on the installation design, so typically conventional systems are facing towards north in southern hemisphere and towards south in northern hemisphere. So once solar panels are installed in the field, as we can see here in this image, there is this reduction in solar radiation. But this reduction in solar radiation also causes reduction in air temperature and soil temperature, which might be a good thing if we are in a hot and dry environment. These reductions would reduce evaporation losses. So there's a conservation of water, which improves water use by plants. And so depending on the environment where we are, so reduction in solar radiation can maybe reduce biomass production or improve biomass production. It also depends on plant characteristics themselves.
Yeah, super important. And you do a lot of research as well, looking at the different positioning. What would you say, like how does the different positioning of solar panels impact on productivity as well?
Yeah, so as I was saying, so there are two ways of installing solar panels. So one way on the left is called ground-mounted design, where the space between solar panels are provided to minimize the shading of solar panels by the row in front of it. So inherently, when solar panels are installed in field, there is a gap between these two rows of solar panels. But depending on our farming requirements, since solar is integration of solar and agriculture, so depending on farming requirements, we can further space out these rows of solar panels to integrate agriculture. The other design is more expensive one, as Feli pointed out. The installation cost is higher, but then with solar panels up above the head, so there is more access to the land, and yeah, so the spacing between these rows will allow us to use more intensive cropping and use of farming equipments.
And so, Ganesh, you were talking about how there can be those microclimates that solar panels can support, and the different installations. Can you give an example as to what that would look like within the Tasmanian context and how that can support farming resilience here?
Right. So if we go to the next slide. So this is a small modeling exercise which we have performed in Elliot, Tasmania. So Elliot, so when we think about Tasmania, it's more favorable. The climate is cool, temperate climate. So that means we think there is a good amount of rainfall to support agricultural production, which is true in so this here these two graphs compare two different types of installation. One is without solar panels, which is in orange, and then the next one is what if we have solar panels installed. So that will result in reduction in solar radiation and then its impact on biomass production. So particularly in spring, in years with less rainfall, so when we are towards the left, then there is almost equivalent biomass production. But if the year is good year and there is much more rainfall, then we can see that impact of reduction in solar radiation have negative impact on biomass production, whereas in without solar panels, the biomass production is quite high. But the more interesting thing is towards in the summer, where although there is good amount of rainfall, the biomass production in agrivoltaic system is much relatively higher, especially during the dry years. And this also, I think, gives us an opportunity to design a system, particularly with sun tracking panels which move along with the sun, so we can maybe have more shading effects to further support agricultural production.
Thank you, Ganesh. Super interesting research, and I'm sure lots of people will have many questions to ask in terms of looking at that. And yeah, with the yield and things with pasture production, super, super interesting and really important work. So thank you. So next we have Roderick O'Connor from Connorville Estate. So Roderick, for those who don't know you, you've got an incredible solar project that's happening on your farm property. Did you want to give everyone a little bit of a background as to what that project entails?
Thank you, Hannah. And actually, I fell into this by accident. A friend of mine, Simon Reed, who set up, and a bunch of them set up a company called Tasrex, with a renewable energy company, came to me and said, look around Tasmania for sites for potential solar farms. And there was no intention for us to build anything here, but when we looked at around the Western Tiers or even the central part of the state, it was either too far away from substations or not enough area. And it just became blindingly obvious that the best site was actually right on my own farm, wedged in between a massive amount of conservation and very close to the Palmerston substation, the biggest substation in the state.
Yeah, wow. So I'm guessing that's no small undertaking. So what motivated you to be a part of that project?
I'm a person that is more intuitive, and just all the stars seemed to align. It fitted in between our grazing regime, particularly in this lighter country, it's certainly not high value agricultural country at all. It also meant that we could produce considerable size. We could also, it was wedged in beautifully, as I said before, in between a very large conservation footprint. And then also I thought that farming for the future is going to get harder no matter what. And we're certainly in the midst of a climate change phenomenon. Right now, particularly, it's very, very dry. So let's look at things that can keep and maintain myself and my family into the future.
Yeah, so important. I'm guessing that it hasn't always been smooth sailing. So was there kind of a key challenge that you faced and how you kind of overcame that?
I think the key challenge was the sheer size of it. The size, just approximately 300 megawatts, which can power a fair whack of the state at the time. The other thing was that we did have a lot of initial support, because it is of such state significance and the state is short of power. The other thing is, to me, what would probably stumped me a little bit was just the magnanimity of all the data layers that you require to get a project up.
Wow.
We're 2 years in, and hopefully we're not that far from a financial investment date, and we're a long, long way down the process. Regulation is not easy to get round, or not easy to get a full nuance. So there's a lot of backward and forward coming in there. It will require further support because it's a landmark project.
Yeah, no, awesome.
Just under a minute to go, Hannah.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, no, it's an amazing project, but again, something of that scale, there is such an amazing future, but it's also important to recognize those barriers and how we can help support that, and yeah, kind of installing more solar on farm. But knowing these challenges, would you still say solar has a place in the future? And what's your future kind of hope for solar?
Very much so for me. I mean, the actual yield from solar in this state is actually quite high, even compared to places in Victoria, especially if you're further away into the centre of the state, where we've got it on the easternmost part of the project. I put solar in on also a couple of other of our a pump and also a shearing shed, so that ultimately we can actually multimeter. It'd be good if we could try and get power to go through all our meters. We've got 19 of them, rather than actually having a renewable energy project that's only attached to 1 meter. And that's the next regulatory change we'd like to see get changed. So with that, I think it just opens up the door for more self-reliance. And our big project opens up the door for more reliance in the state, particularly in the future.
Totally. No, it's an exciting project, and I think we're all super excited to see how it evolves. Alrighty. So next we have Dr. Liz Smith from the Agrisolar CRC bid, but you wear a few hats as well. So Liz, I will let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Hannah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'm the director of the Agrisolar CRC bid. I represent a consortium of 64 industry and research partners who have collectively submitted an application to the federal government for a 10-year cooperative research centre on the topic of Agrisolar and how it might solve a pile of industry challenges. Special shout out today. I can see that a couple of our partners are on the call in Stephen Todd and Ebony Greaves. Apologies if I've missed anybody, but welcome and thank you for joining. The reason for this centre bid to the federal government's Department of Industry and Science is that current debates on the adoption of renewable energy in prime agricultural land in Australia raise the issue of costs in loss of viable agricultural production and by extension a failure to secure food security in favour of energy security. So this is quite a fraught debate that we're stepping into, but we hope to solve it by shining a light on things that work and that have the social licence to operate very quickly. If we can flick to the next slide, thanks. Some quick definitions for you, because everybody comes at Agrisolar from a different viewpoint, but the version that we have gone with for the purposes of our bid, it's not just panels and paddocks to us. We're talking about the adoption of any type of solar energy production within farming land or within the farm itself, so behind the meter energy production, as well as looking at utility scale implementation of solar on agricultural and marginal lands. Some quick examples that might help you think outside the box include floating solar or putting panels over lakes or dams in order to increase shade and assist with energy production there. Or you can look at tiny solar cells, and I'll flick forward to talking about that in a moment. But if we can go to the next slide. Our bid to the federal government is a national one, so including partners from Western Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and some third-party relationships in Tasmania already, thanks to Hannah and the wonderful team. So we hope to represent a whole of Australian approach to enable a complete market to emerge that is made here for us, by us. So for Agrisolar, in essence, to get off the ground, we've encouraged our energy partners to engage in what we call a shift in mindset. It's a bit risky sometimes when you're talking to energy partners to suggest this, but we maintain that the agricultural activity taking place must be thought of with equal importance to, or more importance than, the commercial return of the energy production that's taking place on the same patch of dirt. So what we want to do is preserve what's going on the farm or improve it by diversification and by introducing the energy production. We don't want to replace it. We want to have two things working in harmony together, and we think that the 10-year program of research and development that we're proposing will get us down that path. If we can head to the... Thanks. If we can head to the next slide. And I'll wrap up shortly. This means that we've got an opportunity to think outside the box. We have some awesome tech innovators in our atmosphere in Australia that are doing homegrown work and making things in Australia to support this. So perovskite photovoltaics present opportunities for sovereign manufacture. So by perovskite, it's a very different type of solar cell to your silicon-based panel. The Cellspan team in Carcoar, New South Wales, they've bought a steel roll former and they print these cells themselves onto that fencing structure that you can see on the slide. And what we have there is a complete solar-powered vertical fence that you can move around the farm at will that doesn't impact the farm production. That's the goal. Halo cell, I mentioned teeny tiny solar cells before. So the goal is to replace lithium batteries with very flexible solar cells that could one day be embedded in animal ear tags, that could really transform the way farms work through the use of solar power, tracking and sensing for your animals and tracking their well-being as well. If we can flip to my last slide. So what's next? These emerging technologies and examples of opportunities help us to start to see Agrisolar as more of a system design solution. So as I said, not just panels in paddocks. It's about everything that goes in and out of the farm being improved due to the incorporation of PV technology in a way that works for the farm and the community around it. Of course, our system design is a blue sky model. If funded, our CRC bid will only need 10 years to get there. So this brings me to my conclusion, but where I shamelessly plug what we're doing. So please reach out to me via email or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you don't have time for a question today, we also have a website. We're always really happy to chat about what we can be doing and what we can be including in the context to ensure that all of our partners are represented. And a tiny shout out to a company called Phoenix. If you haven't heard from them or of them before, they do completely mobile solar distribution on farm. They can pick up these panels, move them anywhere. It comes with a battery. So if you've got an energy blackout on your property, they can really solve that quickly. And it's all cow friendly, as you can see on the slide and in my background today. Yeah, very
so
cute.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Liz. So many exciting things happening in the solar space. And yeah, from teeny tiny to mobile, there's so much opportunity and stuff moving in the space. So super exciting, your bid, and all the best with it. And I'm sure everyone will be really excited to see how that evolves. So thank you so
Yes, keep you
much.
posted. Thank you.
Yeah, please do. So now this is the time where I'm handing it over to you guys a little bit. If you've got any pressing questions that you have for any of the panelists in particular.
I'm curious about so we know that the US, they're doing agrivoltaics and they're running sorghum and various other things underneath the panels to get a carbon heavy crop for biochar, which is our specialist thing. So I'm just curious, has that been done in Australia yet? And if so, what crops did they run? Well, that's okay. We'd love to chat to people about doing that.
Not to my knowledge, the main focus has been on, in the biochar space presently, the work at Deakin University and in rural New South Wales in the Riverina has been around whether biochar has an additional sequestration property when used as a fertilizer underneath panels. So it's more about the end product. In terms of the production of biochar, there's one small example that we will have within the CRC, but that's a biomass crop of pumpkins. So I'm not sure whether we'll get any biochar out of that at the other end. But we'd be really keen to explore that within the CRC if we get appropriate research proposals. But to my knowledge, no, you're looking at a completely unique proposal for Australia so far.
Okay, interesting. And then the second question was to understand the scale and intent for the solar energy. Is it intended to displace diesel on farm? Because we get excited if it's a megaliter of diesel. That's the kind of size when we're talking to the mines about doing projects to decarbonize, that things get exciting. We can do more through the carbon markets for them. Do we have any agrivoltaic projects that are getting up to that kind of magnitude, or are they just quite small trials, experiments?
No, presently there's just a lot of small trials in Australia, and this is why we need to really help the industry emerge as a market leader in our country in order to reach those goals. But I'd be happy to talk to you further. I know that Essential Energy in New South Wales has been wondering about the opportunities to replace diesel generation or diesel use on farm, but there might be some alignments in what they want to look at in a New South Wales context.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, James and Liz. I might just jump in here, Hannah, because there's a few questions coming through on the chat, and a couple of them are destined for Roderick. So Roderick, if you're happy to come off chat, someone's asked about the size of your solar project, how many hectares? And then there's a couple more about barriers and challenges.
The site, it's around about 550 hectares. So, and that is, as I already said before, it's in low production country. It's going to generate around about 300 megawatts.
That's great. Thanks, Roderick. That links to another question. Before we go there, people are asking about the biggest barrier or challenge in relation to starting their renewables journey. Roderick, got any insights to
that? I think it's like most things you do, it's timing. If we'd started this project or tried to start it 3-4 years before now, I think it would have been really, really difficult. If we try it again in probably 3 or 4 years' time, I think it's going to be really, really difficult. So I think there'll be a saturation. And then obviously you've got the Marinus project at some stage changing the dynamic. But I think now we're in the sweet spot, whether it's wind or whether it's solar, is to at least do something on farm. I think my main focus is not only this very large project, but it's also smaller projects that where you can multi-meter. So as you know, with the renewable energy thing you can do on farm, if it's on a shearing shed, it goes to the shearing shed meter. But if you've got 10 or 15 other meters on your farm, why can't we route the power to there if the shearing shed's not being used, rather than having to just send it back to the grid and getting very little back from it? So I think it's a time now to look at that. If you are fortunate to have just 1 or 2 meters, it's great, because then you can get to more self-sufficiency without relying on the grid, because grid pricing for feed-in tariffs are just reducing very, very quickly.
Can I add something to that and be interactive?
Please
Totally.
do.
Oh, hi, I'm Dan from SAS Energy. I just want to go back to the diesel conversation before. One of the biggest, we believe, outside climate threats in Australia to agriculture and regional Australia is the supply of diesel. It's reported that we're supposed to have 22 days of diesel stored at any one time, but reports can come down to 3 days, 5 days. We've just seen floods where they were helicoptering diesel into farms to make sure they could produce. Now, if something, it's not really a scare, if something goes on at a macro level in this country, we're going to have literally tens of thousands of pumps and businesses in regional Australia that don't have any energy if they can't get the fuel. And so there's this topic around independence and energy security, which people aren't talking about. There are tens of thousands of pumps in Western Australia, South Australia, and Northern Territory alone that are not grid connected and rely on a truck turning up every week to drop them off 2,000 litres, 1,000 litres. So it's a massive problem that needs to be addressed. It's an exciting problem, but anything could happen any day, and suddenly with the trucks won't be able to deliver our vegetables, beef, whatever it is. We'll be up the creek. That's my comment on that.
Wow, super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hannah, I might keep, there's a lot of good chat happening in the chat, so keep it going there. But there was a question for Veli about was the $2.5 to $3 per watt for the Dookie Canson system for the whole install, structure, panels, electrics, etc.?
Yeah, I just finished typing that out in the chat. So answer to those questions, yes, yes, and yes. Now, people have to take into consideration this was a pilot project, a first of its kind for covering grapes. There was another project that they did with pears on a different campus, but under the University of Melbourne mantle. The price at $2 to $3 a watt. From a cost-benefit analysis, it's high, and there's no way I would say that a farmer would take that into would go down that road at that price, especially when standard ground mount systems, even with tracking, you're looking at about $1.5 dollars per watt. The whole thing is it just depends from when we're talking about financial metrics, it just depends on what kind of project we're talking about. on one side, we've got the whole, power purchase agreements, large scale projects, arbitrage, FCAS, and various other income streams, as opposed to a small farmer who's going, look, I just want to address my loads on the farm and electrical loads, and how can I do that? And it'd be great if I could, if I am going to go down that road of commercial solar ground mount systems, kind of have an additional benefit. Because I think personally, one of the most important things is we should not be displacing viable agricultural land in the second driest continent in the world. It's a real issue, because what's the hierarchy? It's air, water, and food before energy. So yeah.
Billy, that brings into a question, and this sort of leaning on what Roderick was saying about power going into the grid, prices coming down. But someone's asked a question about solar on marginal, unproductive land that's close to Launceston with high voltage transmission. Is that sort of thing likely to become viable?
Well, it is already viable. Now, we haven't done we've done solar farms up to 5 meg, and there's a certain point after 5 meg it becomes fairly problematic. And we've also put in battery systems without any solar that are actually financially viable due to what they call frequency control ancillary services. In other words, the ability of the battery, and if there's a solar system as well, to actually control the frequency of the grid. And that is a very valuable thing to be able to do, and you get paid accordingly. Also, the whole arbitrage side of things, where you're actually selling electricity to the wholesale market. Now, a standard from the perspective of standard export, you are not getting anything. So for the small consumer or the farmer who's putting a system on and he's exporting to the grid, in other words, he's creating excess power that after being consumed on the farm is going out to the grid. You're getting, can I say bugger all? Because that's what it is. And by 2030, I've said it already. So by 2030, that'll go down to zero. So personally at Greenwood, we don't do any financial proposals that take into consideration any export to the grid when it's purely that grid export. But under various other schemes, from the perspective of power purchase agreements and other financial projects, it's a completely different story. Right, so there's these different tiers when it comes to this whole thing, whether it's purely solar by itself or it's agri. Yeah.
Thanks, Veli. That's really really great insights there. I might throw back to Roderick. Are you expecting an increase in wool production as a side benefit of the installation, and if so, how much?
I was just answering that in the chat.
I keep catching people just before.
Yeah, but I think only about 20%, 10 to 20% increase. But the main benefit will be the longevity and conservation of the mixed pasture, because it's light country. It's a mix between introduced and native, and it's always a really fine line between overgrazing that country or grazing at the wrong time. So we're hoping to avoid that. So yes, an increase in production of wool, even if it's only 10%, it'd be still great. But as long as I've got a preservation of species, which means we won't probably ever have to repasture again.
And Roderick, I mean, that speaks a little bit to the sort of the income of the solar farm and balancing that with all of the other parts of your enterprise. Do you have any sort of insights on how it does contribute to the farm income stream, and how to sort of manage that in relation to all of your other sort of costs and revenue?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure, but what it will do is it will be able to fix a weak area of production. The second thing we'll be able to do is we'll be able to change the mix of the property. I think traditional farming going into the future has got some serious problems, purely because just cost pressures in the first world, and particularly in Australia, just the costs of producing it. So we have to think outside of the square by looking at other enterprises, and this to me is just one of them. And it starts for me and our family a raft of other things that we can do. What that may be, I'm not sure, but it could be horticulture, it could be house stuff. We've got water, we've got power, so I think anything's possible.
Cool. Well, I'll just finish up there before handing back to Hannah for maybe one more question from the audience. Someone's asked about the wholesale. Given the wholesale price of power is low, what makes your 300 megawatt project viable? And you've sort of spoken about the opportunities that it brings and gives you a bit of scope to explore other things. Do you have any more to add on that, the viability of your current project?
The wholesale price of power, I don't think will actually increase. And that sounds a bit odd, but even with Marinus coming on, but it will eventually because there's such bigger demand for power. We're short in this state. I think it's also a timing issue when you can provide and how you store it and who you actually partner with in order to do that as well. And in that partnership, you can actually then ameliorate some of those benefits. It is not a great earner, though. It's not a massive earner. It's a good project and it earns well, but it's not as big as people think this may be. But it's crucial that all parties, myself and Tasrex and the investors or whatever, just committed to making sure we have an alternate energy source in this state. Otherwise, there'd be nothing. And so it's a little bit impact. Sort of almost in a way, for me, it's a bit of impact investing, and that's why I'm interested. But it's economic enough to make a project. And hope that answers the question.
That's awesome. Thanks, Roderick. And look, apologies, there's been a lot of good chat and questions in the chat. So thanks everyone for contributing. I'm sorry I didn't get to everyone, and I hope people feel relatively okay with the mix of questions. There's probably time for one more person to come off mute and ask a question if they want. Otherwise, I'll hand it to Hannah to maybe finish us off with a question.
My question would be around, you've done a whole lot of work with the modeling. You've been looking at the different ways that you can place your solar panels for balancing the trade-offs between yield and energy. What would you say is the biggest takeaway between balancing those trade-offs?
Thank you. And I think this is a very critical question. So when we talk about productivity, if we only see from agricultural production or energy yield perspective, then the thing might not be it's practical because ultimately economics drives the decision of installing any project in the farm. And from purely economic perspective, what we see is that revenue generated from energy sale per unit per hectare of land it's a lot more than what we achieve from agricultural production. But having said that, the cost of installation for energy producers or to install solar PV systems, it's quite substantially higher than the investment in farming. So all of these, from all of these things, what we have seen is that policy plays a vital role. So in countries where solar PV favor high profitability, in those areas there is a concern that only installing solar panels in the field and completely displacing agricultural production might further cause food security issues. So I think when installing agrivoltaic system, I think as Liz also pointed out, I think agriculture should be the main focus because we are using agricultural land to produce both energy and agriculture. So while installing solar panels, we have to install in such a way that it supports agriculture. And then when we look at modeling or even in practical system, that once solar panels are installed in the field, the impact on biomass reduction is the impact of solar radiation reduction on biomass production is what we see. But during the dry seasons or in hot climates, we see the benefits of that setting. So given that in the future, because of climate change and impact of climate change, the agricultural production, there is much uncertainty on water availability and agricultural production. So so the solar panels should be installed in such a way that the overall
Benefits.
variation in agricultural production is reduced, and we make more climate resilient agricultural production from agri-solar projects. And government should or regulations should support these kinds of installations. So just to make it economically viable for both agricultural producers and solar installers.
Totally. Thank you for those
Nice one.
insights.
Hannah, can I just quickly add before we finish up, just that there's some questions both prior to the session and in the session about contacts and keeping up to date with things. We'll make sure we sort of provide that sort of information after the webinar.
Totally. That concludes our webinar session today. So thank you so much, everyone, for all your amazing insights. Thank you again to the panelists. I know I've learned so much in this, and I hope everyone else has too. So be sure to reflect on the discussions today. Think about how solar innovations can be supporting the climate resilience of our agricultural communities, and be sure to keep the conversation going. The Tas Farm Hub is on LinkedIn or on socials as well. And again, we'll email links and events happening. But for now, have a lovely rest of your day. And yeah, look forward to keeping in touch.